Well, hello, my friends, and thank you very much for spending some time with me today on Stand Up with Pete Dominic. Hey, that's me. I'm very excited to have the legend of progressive talk radio, Thom Hartmann, joining me today to talk about the 10th book in his Hidden History series. This one, The Hidden History of the American Dream, the Demise of the Middle Class, and How to Rescue Our Future. Thom Hartmann, New York Times bestselling author, and the most well-known, consistent, successful radio host in all of progressive talk radio, joins me today. That conversation begins at 31 minutes. If you want to skip the news segment here, but don't, because I've got all of your headlines and clips coming your way. Just want to mention it is Thursday as I'm taping this, and I want you to join me at our listener subscriber hangout. Be a member of the Stand Up with Pete Dominic community. Join the Zoom. You can keep your camera off and just hang out, be a fly on the wall, or you can be an active part of the conversation. No matter what, we never want you to feel alone. If you're a member of this community, you can always hang out on Discord. Lots of benefits. Patreon.com/Pete Dominic, including the weekend of March 30th. We'll be gathering again in Vegas. We hope. It's not a done deal. Contracts aren't signed, but Cassie Rice out in Vegas wants to make it happen again, and certainly so do we. We've got a whole bunch of people with verbal commitments, including Professor Eric Siegel, John Carroll, J.L. Covan, Ophira Eisenberg, Christian Finnegan, and Vicky. Yes, Vicky. Buddy Robinson says that she will, of course, be there. Can't do it without you. So please join us at the Hangout tonight to talk about what could be and what has been. Always a lot of fun. That's 8 p.m. East. If you're a stand-up subscriber, you'll get an email with the link. If you, for some reason, don't get that and you'd like it, just let me know. standupwithpete@gmail.com. I'll send it on over. Thanks again to everybody who is at our watch party for the VP debate hangout on Tuesday night. That was a lot of fun. And I am in a great mood because I had dinner with both my girls last night. Ava home from college for a few days because of the Jewish holidays. And to any of our listeners who might be Jewish and celebrating them, happy Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Shana Tova, and all of the rest. Did I do it right? I think it's too early. Rosh Hashanah this weekend, Yom Kippur next weekend, and autumn is in full swing. I love that as well. All right, let's get to it. Here are your headlines and news clips from Earth One, or reality, our reality at least, where yesterday the big story was that a federal judge, Judge Chutkan in D.C., made public portions of this sprawling legal brief in which prosecutors provided the fullest picture yet of what they found in their investigation of Donald Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. In the brief, the special counsel Jack Smith depicted scenes in which Trump minimized concerns for the safety of then Vice President Mike Pence during the January 6 riots by saying, "I don't care. What about Mike Pence? So what?" Trump said, according to the file, "So what?" and dismissed attempts to convince him that he lost the election. More importantly, Smith argued that the disgraced former president is not immune from prosecution because, as the Supreme Court wants to make him, but because his actions at the center of the criminal charges were the unofficial acts of a desperate losing candidate rather than the official acts of a president. Lots to say and discuss about that and read into. We'll see what it all means and shakes out for the election, obviously, whether he wins or whether he loses, whether he would ever be prosecuted. Certainly, if he loses, which is all the more reason to get out the vote. That was definitely yesterday's top story. I've decided, for the purposes of the order in which I read these stories of importance, the next one is the second biggest story, which is the death toll from Hurricane Helene has now risen to 176. Hundreds are still missing as a result of the storm and its aftermath, with many caught in the historic flooding across southeastern states. President Biden traveled to North and South Carolina yesterday afternoon to survey areas devastated by the hurricane, meet with officials leading the rescue efforts. He took an aerial tour of the region where floods and landslides rendered roads useless, turned downtowns into ghost towns, and reduced entire neighborhoods to rubble. The president also ordered the Pentagon to deploy up to 1,000 active duty troops to join thousands of National Guard members in providing disaster relief. This makes Helene the deadliest hurricane to strike the mainland U.S. since Katrina in 2005. Unclear how many people are still missing, and the death count keeps going up. It's going to take a long haul to restore these communities, President Biden said. In Asheville, a fast-growing city in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, water access remains a stubborn problem. Some towns in southern Appalachia that were effectively knocked off the grid have turned to methods that have been out of date for a century or more, like town meetings where everybody just gathers for daily updates. It is always amazing to see people coming together after a tragedy like this. Look for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers always said. And then this detail I thought was really interesting. As the deadly storm, new reporting now from North Carolina's WRAL, as the deadly storm approached the southeastern U.S. last week, the governor, Democrat Roy Cooper, his office asked top state officials to support his call for emergency help. He needed approval from the other elected officials in North Carolina's executive branch, a group of 9 known as the Council of the State in North Carolina. So he needed their approval to exercise certain authorities under the North Carolina Emergency Management Act. Within an hour of making the request on September 4th, before the hurricane ravaged the western part of the state, most of the council had responded with supporting votes. But come 9 a.m. the next morning, one member had yet to cast a vote. Guess who that was? Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, the Black Nazi, Republican nominee for governor, more important. He had not responded, and I'm sure I see that campaign ad coming. We talked about this at the Hangout the other night, how much of an effect would the hurricane have on the election, specifically there in North Carolina. It looks like the federal government is responding real quick. Top priority, obviously, in any time, much less 30 days before an election, where North Carolina is a real important state. You want to see government working for you in a tragedy like that, especially FEMA. But that can't be good for Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson's campaign. All right. Oh, and by the way, the disgraced former president continues to argue that it's late in the hurricane season. Hurricane season, of course, doesn't end until the end of November. It's basically the peak of hurricane season. And he said, we never thought we'd see anything like this. Of course, this has been predicted. All right, let's go to the Middle East, where Israel is vowing that Iran will have to pay for its missile attack. An Israeli official told NBC News the country would retaliate swiftly. Tehran, for its part, urged the U.S. to step aside and warned of a far more crushing response as fears grew of all-out war in the Middle East. Israeli military announced deaths of 8 of its soldiers. 8 IDF soldiers were killed yesterday in Lebanon, said that infantry and armored units would join its invasion in the country's south, targeting Hezbollah. But the Iran-backed militant group said yesterday morning that it had repelled the Israeli forces and obviously killed several of them in a Lebanese border town. President Biden said he would not support an attack on Iranian nuclear sites in retaliation for yesterday's missile attack on Israel. Things continue to be a tinderbox there. Now let's come back home to the closely watched labor dispute. Strike of 45,000 dock workers halting shipments at U.S. East Coast and Gulf Coast ports entered its second day yesterday with no negotiations currently scheduled between the two sides. According to Reuters, the lack of progress raising concerns among those relying on shipments that the disruption could be prolonged. The dock worker strike has started to affect an ecosystem of supply chain workers, reports are saying, and it's not good. It's not good. The White House, not exactly neutral. President Joe Biden's administration putting pressure on U.S. port employers to raise their offer to secure a deal with dock workers to end the strike. They made incredible profits, he said, over 800% profit since the pandemic. The owners are making tens of millions of dollars from this. President Biden told reporters yesterday, he said it's time for them to sit at the table, get the strike done. Let's go to Ukraine now, where the Ukrainian military said yesterday that it's ordering the last of its forces to retreat from the ruins of Vuhledar, once a key stronghold against Russia's onslaught on eastern Ukraine. The loss of the town complicates Ukraine's strategy in the Donetsk region and allows Russia to step up its attacks on Pokrovsk, a rail and road hub. However, it took Russia nearly 3 years of attacks to capture Vuhledar, and signs have emerged that both armies are growing exhausted after years of fighting. I'm growing exhausted at trying to pronounce those words in that sense, but I think I nailed it. But terrible news there with the Ukrainians losing that eastern front city. Now let's come back home for a few more headlines. Yesterday, the company OpenAI completed a deal that now values it at $157 billion. I bet you would like to get in that startup. Federal prosecutors in New York yesterday told a judge they might bring additional charges against Mayor Eric Adams. And speaking of bad men, RFK Jr. yesterday, this got kind of buried yesterday, but now facing new claims that he had affairs with 3 other women in the last year, days after his alleged FaceTime sex star reporter Olivia Nuzzi exploded into the open. I said sex star. I meant sex with star reporter Olivia Nuzzi. All the women were connected to the anti-vax charity, which RFK Jr. has turned into the whole springboard for his stupid failed presidential bid. This is a big story that should get a bit more attention. You know what other story might get attention around this is when Cheryl Hines publicly announces that her marriage with RFK Jr. is over. She's done being embarrassed and disgraced by this dirtbag. That would be an interesting headline. Save Cheryl Hines. I kid. I don't like when people do that because for all I know, Cheryl Hines and he have an open deal and it's up to them. So we'll let her speak for herself and others as well. I think that's probably the best way forward. Oh, and finally, yesterday, bad news from the Vatican. You can't believe that the Catholic Church is continuing to prevent women be ordained as deacons. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm joking. I can absolutely believe it. The issue of whether women can be ordained as deacons was taken off the agenda for the big event beginning at the Vatican yesterday. Is it synod? How do you pronounce it, my Catholic friends? I used to be Catholic. I don't remember that word. All right, those are your news headlines from yesterday. Now it's time to get to your clips. The clips. And remember, as always, these are the bad stories. These are overwhelmingly the negative things. That's why they're news. Most things are good. Most moments in your day, hopefully, are free of horror, tragedy, and exceptions to the rules the way news headlines are. Life is hard with a lot of suffering, but let's work together to find the joy and the happiness and the fun, which we'll do at tonight's hangout. We always do it on Thursday nights. I hope to see you there for that. All right, but continuing with the clips, here's the audio I've gathered for you from yesterday. First of all, there was a debate for the Virginia Senate seat held by Tim Kaine right now, and the Republican nominee is a military guy who is a refugee from Vietnam, but a real educated guy who served in both Afghanistan and Iraq Special Forces, but he's also MAGA crazy. His name is Hung Cao. And yesterday, he made a really disgusting claim that the military doesn't, quote, want LGBTQ and other people adjacent to that as a result of, well, they're not alpha? I mean, listen to this. What do you think?
When you're using a drag queen to recruit for the Navy, that's not the people we want. What we need is alpha males and alpha females who are going to rip out their own guts, eat them, and ask for seconds. Those are young men and women that are going to win wars.
Whoa. Rip out their guts and eat them and ask for seconds. Damn. That is ridiculous. A ridiculous notion that your femininity or masculinity affects your ability to be an effective warfighter. You can think about it for a second. I mean, there's so easy to do, just make fun of that ridiculousness. You could be the most flamboyant, feminine person in the world and be an absolute killer who will rip out your guts. Oh, and by the way, the vast majority of people who serve in the military aren't in actual combat. They work in the hulls of carriers, scooping potatoes and cleaning and fixing things, and you don't have to. It's just ridiculous. Oh, it was so offensive. Sorry. Let me move on. Here is another very offensive clip. This is Congressman Tom Emmer. He's a Republican. He's MAGA. He's this very influential guy in the House who played Tim Walz in the rehearsals for the debate. He was on CNN last night doing what Republicans do, deny that Trump continues to talk about the last election when reporters ask him about it. Also, it's a very important question. It's always relevant. And as long as Trump doesn't concede the election last time and is planning to obviously use the blueprint for the game plan for this time, then this is a relevant question. And I'm glad that Caitlin Collins and others are asking this. Here it is. 1 minute.
This would be a topic is because, in 2020, you did sign on to that brief supporting a Texas lawsuit that would have invalidated the election results in 4 states, but you ultimately chose to certify the election. You broke with some of your Republican colleagues, and you chose to certify it. You said in a statement that Congress does not have the authority to discard an individual slate of electors certified by a state's legislature in accordance with their constitution. And you yourself said doing so sets a precedent that I believe undermines the state-based system of elections that defines our republic. I mean, do you still feel that way tonight?
Again, Caitlin, we're talking about an election that's going to take place in 35 days. What are you doing talking about something that's 4 years ago? We can have this
Trump
debate
is still talking about it
some other time going forward. The people are hurting. Well, with all due respect, Caitlin, people want to know. They're hurting. They want to know.
This would be a topic is because.
Yeah, people are hurting. Okay. Thank you very much, Tom Emmer. Good job by Caitlin Collins on CNN last night. And now let's move on to J.D. Vance, who was at a rally yesterday. He was asked a question by a local reporter, and this is how that went. Same issue.
Hi, Senator. Will Jones from Local 4.
Will Jones, Local 4. This is in Auburn Hills, Michigan yesterday. Sorry. Go ahead, Will.
I spoke with some elected officials or election officials last week about their concern about people who are trying to undermine our elections. Why didn't you answer the question last night during the debate about who won the 2020 presidential election?
Well, look, here's the simple reason. The media is obsessed with talking about the election of 4 years ago. I'm focused on the election of 33 days from now because I want to throw.
All right, there you go. That's how he took that. He didn't take it at all. And that seems to be, by the way, the big moment from the VP debate the other night. So as much as I was criticizing and others, Tim Walz and the strategy there, he got the clip. And that's all this is more than anything else. That's what it's the most important impact, I think, of that debate and other moments like it. Also, J.D. Vance yesterday at that rally, he completely dropped the Mr. Nice Guy, friendly, aw shucks bit from the debate night and went right into insulting Tim Walz. So, yeah, everybody calls him a chameleon. It's a good word.
Now, it's funny because, we did this debate and then I talked to the president afterwards and we talked a little bit about, what actually happened and, some of the points that I made, some of the points that Governor Walz made. And he made this observation. He said that Tim Walz said that he was friends with school shooters twice. And that's something I actually didn't notice that Tim Walz had said that on the debate stage. And I said, did he really say that, sir? And he said, I'm telling you, man, go and watch the clips. He said he was friends with school shooters twice. And I said that was probably only the third or fourth dumbest comment Tim Walz made that night then. Because, look, I got to be honest, I feel a little bad for Governor Walz.
There you go. J.D. Vance feels bad for Governor Walz. Of course, he did say that, by the way. I commented on it when it happened. He clearly misspoke. It happens. And that one should be given grace. Everybody knows exactly what he meant. He certainly didn't mean that. It meant he was friends with the school shooters' victims' families, to be perfectly clear. But that didn't stop J.D. Vance from being a complete asshole. All right, let's go to Tim Walz. He was in Pennsylvania last night, and here he is for about a minute and a half on the campaign trail in York, PA.
So I know it was a beautiful Tuesday night. Anybody watch the debate last night? Look, not bad for a football coach. Not bad. So you also saw something interesting. We had a civil but spirited debate. And I did not underestimate Senator Vance is a slick talker. He could. But I also called out there, you can't rewrite history. You can't rewrite history. And trying to mislead us about Donald Trump's record, that's gaslighting. That's gaslighting. So on the economy, reproductive freedom, housing, gun violence, look, they tried to tell us last night, wow, you should be happy. Donald Trump tried to save Obamacare. Are you kidding me? He spent his entire presidency trying to eliminate it. But I'll tell you, I think some of you saw this. When you're governor, congressman, you're trying to solve problems, whatever you want a straight answer on something. The moment that really stuck out is I just asked the simplest of all questions that every single American should be able to answer. I asked him if Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He refused to answer.
There you go, Tim Walz in York, Pennsylvania yesterday. And here is Nancy Pelosi on CNN yesterday talking about the vice presidential debate.
Our discussion back to the United States and to the presidential election. Yeah. And I want to ask you about a moment in last night's vice presidential debate. And listen to what J.D. Vance said specifically about the issue of reproductive rights when he was asked about it.
Up in a working class family in a neighborhood where I knew a lot of young women who had unplanned pregnancies and decided to terminate those pregnancies because they feel like they didn't have any other options. And, you know, I one of them is actually very dear to me. And I know she's watching tonight, and I love you. And she told me something a couple years ago that she felt like if she hadn't had that abortion, that it would have destroyed her life because she was in an abusive relationship. We've got to do so much better of a job at earning the American people's trust back on this issue where they frankly just don't trust us.
An undecided female voter in CNN's post-debate focus group said last night that answer made her more encouraged about the GOP ticket because she said he sounded more progressive than she expected. What would you say to her?
Well, let me first just say, since we're turning to domestic, that our thoughts and prayers of the people of North Carolina and the South for the assault that they were under from the weather. It's so sad that people lost their lives, their homes, so much, their place of business and the rest. So personally, condolences who lost family members. In terms of last night, what can you say? You saw the difference between truth and trust in terms of Walz and con and slick in terms of this administration is for an abortion ban, a national abortion ban. And when they say leave it up to the states have their own abortion bans. We need to protect them by having Roe v. Wade be the national policy of our country. I don't know what hope she saw in that. A woman's right to choose is to choose to have the child or not have the child, or to engage in contraception, which the Republicans, 194 of them voted women do not have the right to contraception. So understand this. Women of America. I'm a mother of five children, 6 years and 7 days. I have 2 birthdays this week of my children. And it is wonderful for me, but not up to me to decide what other people should do, nor is it up to Vance or Trump. So understand this. In their 2025 project, they not only want to have a federal ban on abortion, they want to close the Department of Education to educate those children. The list goes on and on. I think that was...
There you go. That's Nancy Pelosi yesterday on CNN doing, I think, a very good job of talking about that issue, handling that issue as well. All right, now let's go to the president of the Longshoremen's Union. He detailed the grim reality that could be on the horizon should his striking workers not get a new contract. Let's take a listen to that. This is Harold Daggett, the president of the International Longshoremen's Association.
Those greedy companies are making billions of dollars, and they don't want to share. That's why we're out here now fighting for a contract. We're going to fight for it, and we're going to win it. Or this portal will never open up again. From here to Houston. I'm not playing games here.
Understand what you guys do, and they don't want the economy to shut down, but they don't fully understand the job of the men and women who work
That's
here.
The problem. Nobody knew what the longshoremen were. We didn't get respected, but now we will. Now we will when they find out malls are going to shut down because goods can't come in. Right. Car salesmen are going to get laid off. Well, guess what? Everything that comes in this country comes from the containers off these ships that my men work. And I want the world to know it.
They learned during COVID.
Don't come after us saying we're greedy. Go after those greedy that own these companies in Europe. Go after them. They're sitting over there taking $4 billion bonuses for themselves at Christmas time.
I wonder who
that's got to stop.
Is my concern. A lot of people are insinuating that it could be possible that the whole strategy was to hurt the economy in the run up to the election. I'm not, until I see some evidence of that. I mean, I don't know. I'm not that cynical right now about that. They are union members. Let me just look up to see if they've made an endorsement. The union typically supports Democratic candidates, though recently they've contributed less than in previous decades. There is a photo of that guy with the former president, Donald Trump, from a November meeting at Mar-a-Lago, which some claim suggests he supports Trump in next month's election. But neither that guy or the union have endorsed either presidential candidate in this year. Until this year, in 2020, both Daggett and ILA supported President Joe Biden. So I think that's a really important point to make, and we'll learn more about that. Hopefully that'll end soon. Eesh, that's definitely got me concerned. All right, now finally, here is Jimmy Kimmel last night on Jimmy Kimmel Live on ABC for you.
We are 34 days away from Trump saying the election was rigged, and which is just as he did 4 years ago, and just as is laid out in a comprehensive and damning new report from Special Counsel Jack Smith. Remember him? The judge overseeing the January 6th case in Washington unsealed a 165-page court filing that specifically details a mountain of evidence and testimony against Donald Trump. All the stuff we know happened, we now have in writing from dozens of members of Trump's inner circle, including his vice president. We went through all 165 pages this afternoon. When I say we, I mean Guillermo and me. Yes. Did 82 and a half pages. Can you believe all that stuff?
I can't.
What jumped out at you as most shocking?
Oh, my God, it was crazy. It's too much. It was
too much, yeah. Finally, he is right, though. It finally lays out the increasingly desperate ways Trump tried to steal the election. You know, sometimes I would wonder, does Trump really believe that this election was stolen from him? Does he believe it? And the answer is no, he doesn't. His plan all along was to declare himself the winner, even if he wasn't, which he did. And then when he realized he was going to lose, he made up these claims of fraud. He called governors and election officials. He hammered Mike Pence. He deliberately spread lies, even though he privately admitted they were crazy lies. He was directly involved in the fake elector scheme, and he stole all the Oreos from the White House snack cabinet, double stuffed them down his pants, and many of the names in the filing are redacted. They blacked them out, but it's not that hard to figure out who's who. For instance, while aboard Marine One, the defendant told his wife, daughter, name redacted, and son-in-law, name redacted. It doesn't matter if you won or lost the election. You still have to fight like hell. I wonder which daughter and son-in-law he was talking to. Could it have been Ivanka and Jared? It's like a game of Clue. Colonel Ketchup did it with a shrimp fork in the dining room. One thing I didn't know, I knew Trump pressured Mike Pence to break the law. I just didn't know how many times he did it. There were meetings, phone calls, text messages. Pence was basically Trump's baby reindeer. Listen to this.
All right, there you go. I actually don't get that, but that's The Baby Reindeer. Is a very popular show that I still haven't watched. Sorry about that. But maybe those of you who did got the joke. All right, well, let's jump over to CBS The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Here is how he opened his monologue.
All still struggling to digest last night's vice presidential debate, which is surprising because usually I have no trouble eating 2 slices of white bread. Because last night, I don't know if you guys watched, but last night was a frosty cup of ZQuil. But one common take across all the news channels is that boring is good.
There was no shouting, name-calling or talking over each other. In fact, the U.S. vice presidential debate seemed almost normal.
There was a very calm, normal debate.
This felt like almost like going back into the past of this is what VP debates sort of felt like in the normal times.
Hey, you know what's not normal? Celebrating how normal something is. Our special tonight is a perfectly normal, nothing to see here piece of chicken that is definitely not the chef's foot that fell into a pot. It's served on a bed of Dr. Scholl's Bon Appetit. The Atlantic described the debate as a vision of what American politics could be without the distorting gravitational field generated by Donald Trump. Yeah. No, I agree. I love that. I would love that. It is true. It could be, but here's the thing. Donald Trump hasn't gone anywhere. He's still the main character. This is like a scene from It without Pennywise on camera. And suddenly everyone's like, well, guess there's no more scary clowns in Derry. Ooh, free sewer balloon.
I like that.
Vance spent the entire debate trying to un-fascist Trump's ideas by lying about them with a calm voice and blue eyes. Like this moment where he recast Trump's repeated attempts to repeal Obamacare in an entirely different light.
I think you can make a really good argument that it salvaged Obamacare, which was doing disastrously until Donald Trump came along.
That kind of junior high debate team sophistry is exactly the worst kind of behavior intelligent people use to justify evil. You know what? When you think about it, it could be argued that Godzilla really spearheaded Tokyo's urban renewal. And he wouldn't have to use his nuclear breath if we just had more domestic energy production.
All right, there you go. Colbert on CBS last night. And those are all the clips I've got for you, the headlines as well. Thank you very much for staying with me through that. I always want to be able to give you the most robust, comprehensive news rundown possible on any daily podcast. Tell your friends that if they are news junkies like us, they'll love the recap that Pete Dominic does on Stand Up each and every day. And even more importantly, they'll love the original content, the guests that I am able to get on this powerful, influential daily podcast, such as today's. The great Thom Hartmann joins me. He is such a big deal, such a smart guy, and has been consistently the most popular voice in progressive talk radio my entire career. He's a 4-time winner of the Project Censored Award, a New York Times best-selling author of over 30 books, and like I said, #1 progressive talk radio show host for more than a decade. And today we're talking about the 10th book in his series, the Hidden History series. This one is The American Dream, the Demise of the Middle Class, and How to Rescue Our Future. Very excited to have Thom Hartmann back on the show. Follow him on all the social media. And just one note about this interview. I think the audio is okay. But at one point, an airplane flies over and it's very, very loud. So loud, in fact, that it seemed like, that Thom was on it, like on the wing of it. And anyway, Thom mentions it, he hears it, and then he says to me that those are fighter jets. But not. He keeps talking over the fighter jets. He doesn't. I'm almost comical that he plowed through it. I love Thom. I love that he did this, but it did make me kind of chuckle. I was like, all right, I guess we're going ahead, and we're not going to wait for the invasion to end for Thom to continue his point. You can hear what he's saying over it, but hopefully you enjoyed that kind of the way I did. Thom is a legend. I love this conversation. The book is so important. Get every book in the series. Let's do it right now with the great Thom Hartmann and the Blue Angels. There is the legend. He joins me, and it's always a real honor and a pleasure, and very excited to talk about your new book. Congratulations, the 10th in the series. Wow, impressive. Why did you want to end with the hidden history of the American dream, Thom Hartmann?
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for having me back on your program. It's always a pleasure and an honor to hang out with you. The American dream seems to me the kind of encapsulation of everything else. We wrote about guns, we wrote about healthcare, we wrote about the Republican war on voting, we wrote about the Supreme Court, monopolies, quack, neoliberalism. But this kind of pulls it all together. What is the idea of America? What was the goal of the founders? What was, and over the centuries, literally the decades and centuries, as we've kind of fine-tuned that, what is the real goal of most Americans about being an American? And frankly, I think it's to live the American dream, and by that, I'm defining it as having the ability, and I realize Republicans love to say, oh, the American dream, that means you too can be Elon Musk.
Right.
No, that's the American dream.
Yeah.
You too could win a lottery. No, the American dream is the life my dad had working in a tool and die shop. With one paycheck, you can buy a house, you can buy a car, you can put your kids through college, you can raise your family, you can take a vacation every year, you can retire with a pension and have a decent old age, and and have health care and never worry that an illness is going to bankrupt you or your family, or that your kids are not going to achieve their potential because they can't get an education, or that you're going to end up homeless, because of some circumstances completely beyond your control. And that, when Ronald Reagan came into office in 1981, 2/3 of us lived that situation.
Yeah, well,
and not so much now. Now it's 43% of us, and now it takes 2 working people in a family to do what you could do with 1 working family. Actually, 2.3 working people in a family to produce the same standard of living as 1 person could do in 1981. And there's a reason for this. I mean, there's a reason why the Republicans went after the middle class. And frankly, they did it out of the best of intentions, or at least some of them. But, the result has been devastating for the American
you say they did it out of the best of intentions. You define the American dream, and you get really granular and specific in the book to talk about all different parts of the, quote, American dream, from education to healthcare to obviously employment and more, the right to be safe in your home and so on. And we'll get into it. But I feel like no one's better at debating conservatives than you and arguing, and you're always happy to do it. So I figured I'd try to say the one thing I think they might say, which is, got it, Tom, read the whole book, love it, but we just disagree on the role of government. It's not the government's job to provide the American dream or the circumstances for the American dream. That's not what the Constitution says the role of government is. Unfortunately, that's the only main argument I could think. But their view on what government should do obviously is different. I don't think it's realistic. It's not like any other countries. But what would you say to that argument? Because it's all I got.
Well, first of all, I would point out that in the preamble of the Constitution, 2 other places in the Constitution mentions that the role of government is promoting the general welfare. If living the American dream is not promoting the general welfare, I don't know what is. I mean, there's nothing more straightforward than that. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's from the Declaration, of course, but that's what we're talking about here as well. And the second point I'd make is that in a capitalist society, if you have unregulated capitalism, if you have the libertarian dream, if the only thing that government did was provide, police, army, and the court system to adjudicate fraud, and disputes between businesses, that's all the government did, you would end up with the natural result of unregulated capitalism, of laissez-faire capitalism. And that's the world that Charles Dickens wrote about. That's where you end up with 1% at the very top who own 90% of the wealth. You have another 4 or 5% at the very top who are the middle class, and they control maybe 5 or 10% of the wealth at the most. And then the bottom 90% plus are the working poor, the serfs. In Christmas Carol, Charles Dickens' famous book, Ebenezer Scrooge was the middle class. He had a small 1-employee business. That's as small as a business can get. He was a small businessman, and he lived the middle class. But Bob Cratchit was everybody else, with Tiny Tim, and he couldn't even get health care for his son, who was so that would be the natural outcome. And so we decided a long time ago in this country that we didn't want to have that we did not want America to resemble Victorian-era England. When, by the way, they had a maximum wage law to keep people in poverty because they believed that a middle class was a dangerous thing. If the masses, the rabble, John Adams used to call them, were to rise up. And but we made the decision that, no, we want America to be a land of opportunity. We want there to be a strong and vibrant middle class in America. And that requires intervention in the marketplace by government. There's no other agency that can do it. Benevolent billionaires aren't going to do it. There's no corporate riff or, rule or something that will do it. You do it very simply, very straightforward. You do it with unions, with giving workers democracy in the workplace, right, the right to fight back against the kings and kingdoms of the big corporations. You do it with subsidized health care throughout the country. You do it with subsidized education throughout the country. You do it with supports for housing. You do it with public health work, so that, in the event of a crisis like a pandemic, and you do it with emergency work like FEMA. Without those things, you can't have and sustain a middle class. It's just that simple.
One of the things that I hear folks arguing today, I just had a guy mention this to me on social media, he doesn't care about the character of the president. So my arguments about Trump being, a rapist, sexually assaulting a lunatic didn't resonate. He doesn't care about that as long as and then he talked about his wages and his salary. And you hear that a lot, Tom. And the one question I wanted to just make sure I hit this one, ask folks is, but what about your health care? Where do you get your health insurance from for you and your family? How would that be different with Democrats than it is Republicans? So take me through the history of health care, because if the argument you're making resonates with them, that it's the government's role, it says it right there in the Constitution, promote the general welfare, well, that word welfare sounds a lot like health care. So what about that part of the American dream that I feel like a lot of people don't remember or never understood when we kind of relitigated it in 2010?
Yeah, first I would say to your friend on social media, character does matter. The president of the United States is the father figure for the country. And young people use that person as a role model. And when you've got a rapist who is celebrated for being a rapist as the father figure of the country, you got a problem. But speaking to the healthcare issue, we know, again, this is regulated versus unregulated capitalism. It used to be that health insurance companies said, oh, you were born with diabetes? Or you had, you got diabetes when you were 5, 6, 7 years old, or you were born with, some sort of a disability. Screw you. We're not going to insure you. We're just not going to do it, period. Or you get cancer and, we treat you successfully and then the cancer comes back. Well, that's a pre-existing condition. We're going to drop you from the rolls. We're no longer going to cover you at all. And that, I'm sorry, F-16's going over here.
Those sound like fighter jets above your home.
Yeah, they are. I can't even hear you, but the bottom line is that we said to those companies with the Affordable Care Act, you can't screw people like that anymore. You can still make a profit. We're gonna let you make a profit, but we're not going to let you screw people, because a capitalist company or any corporation, the prime directive of a corporation is to make profits, and it's not to take care of people. That's the job of government, making sure that people are good, making sure that profits are good is the purpose of a corporation, and that's why you have to put appropriate regulations. You have to have regulated capitalism rather than laissez-faire, just raw, naked, grinding capitalism.
Why does you go deep into and know as much about, all these things as anybody, but organized labor and the history there. How does that promote the general welfare that unions confiscate money from my check is how it's said. They confiscate money, my hard-earned money. The union takes it just by the nature of me being employed at that school. And damn it, I'm pissed. By the way, I should mention my mom is a retired Syracuse City School District. I was just talking to her about her health care. She says she's never had to pay for anything. Like, she got a bill for 19 cents because between her union covered health care that they negotiated hard for and Medicare, she's doing great. So pretty amazing.
Yeah. So your question was, I got distracted. I'm sorry.
The history of the organized labor movement, because it used to be far more powerful.
You're absolutely right. Yes, democracies cost money. You have to have a minimal infrastructure for a democracy. You have to have, people who administer it, people who litigate on its behalf, people who work for it, people who work on your behalf. And a union is a democracy. Corporations are not democracies. Corporations are kingdoms. The CEO is the king. The middle level executives are the lords and ladies, and then all the workers are the serfs. Corporations are literally organized after the kingdom model. Governments, unions are organized after a government model of democracy. So, number one, it costs money to run a democracy. Number two, there are considerable benefits from having a democracy. I start the book out in the first chapter, the introduction to the book. I point out that when my generation, I'm a boomer, right? When my generation was in their 30s and 40s, mid 30s to mid 40s, in the 1990s, we controlled 21.6% of all the wealth in America. One generation. Right now, young people in their 30s and 40s control 5.1% of the, I'm sorry, it's 21.1, 4.6%. Little less than 5%. I should forget about the decimal points. Little less than 5% of the wealth. What's the difference? Back then, we had healthy, robust unions who were negotiating good wage and salary packages, and people had good pay. Reagan got rid of those unions. Republicans got rid of those unions. Every red state is now a right to work for less state, which means that it's really hard to start a union. It's really hard to sustain a union. And the consequence of that is that, Gen X and Gen Z have just been completely screwed by our system. And you can thank the Republican Party for that.
Yeah, you can thank the Republican Party for doing all it can to also destroy the public education system. I am fond of saying the public education system built America for good, for better and for worse. If Thom Hartmann were in charge, things would be a lot better and more fair and equitable. And frankly, we'd still be arguing about education policy. But now we're arguing about crazy things, whether or not the moon is made of cheese, who won the Civil War, and trans kids in schools. These are the things that we're arguing about in my district, and it's crazy. But you have a good bit here in your new book about how public education built America, and for years now, since I think we start with Reagan, that they've tried to privatize it, destroy it, and take all the money and put it in people's pockets and not in kids' brains.
That's right. And there's really kind of two villains here. One is the Republican Party has long railed against public education, and I think it's mostly because billionaires don't like to pay taxes, and they own and control the Republican Party, and so any kind of public benefit that's going to end up being taxes for billionaires, they're going to oppose.
Do the rest of us hold on? But do the rest of us in my district, where there's probably maybe a few billionaires, who knows if any, do the rest of us like to pay taxes, conservative or liberal, to fund public education? Was that a fight when you were young?
No. I've had people call into my program over the years. I even heard this argument back in the 60s and 70s of, I don't have children. Why am I paying property taxes?
Yeah, I hear that.
Well, because an educated populace provides a quality of life to everybody, right? Do you want to have, doctors and lawyers and, people do you want to have an educated society? Do you want to have a safe, stable society? Do you're going to have a public education system to do it. And you're absolutely right. Right now, Republicans are deconstructing them. You've got 4 states now, 4 Republican-controlled states, where you've got universal voucher systems, where they're literally trying to destroy the entire public school system, in part to get rid of the unions. These people hate, these Republicans hate unions, and most of your public schools have been unionized since the 50s. But also in part because they just don't, they don't want to be paying for public schools. So what do? They take the money that would go to the public schools and they give it to people in the form of vouchers that don't even quite cover the cost of most private education. So these are really subsidies to upper middle class families who would otherwise still be sending their kids to private schools. And now, and the thing about the private schools is that, they don't have to take everybody by law. Public schools have to take everybody.
Right.
And so what happens is the private schools say, we don't have to take the kids who, have an IQ below 90 or who have learning disabilities or, behavioral problems. So we'll just dump all those kids in the public school system, or what fragment of it is left, and let them deal with it. And we'll just take the profitable kids. I mean, it's basically the same scam the insurance companies were doing when they said we don't want to insure sick people. And so it's a real tragedy. And you're right. Reagan started this when he came into office. He cut federal aid to education by 18%. And that's why we have a $2 trillion student debt situation. When Reagan came into office, you could go to college anywhere in the United States and pay for it, like I did. I didn't graduate, but I paid my way through Lansing Community College and Michigan State University by working as a dishwasher at Bob's Big Boy and pumping gas at the Esso station across the street. You can't do that anymore. But the reason you could back then was because when Reagan came into office, 80% of the cost of an education was paid for by state and federal funds. 20% was tuition. Today, 20% is paid for by state and federal funds and 80% is tuition. And so you've got to go broke just to get a damn education.
Well, yeah, and you have a
of the 34 OECD countries, the most the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the developed countries, what we refer to as the developed world, those 34 countries, there's only one where education is not considered a right. There's only one where education is not heavily subsidized. There's only one where you can't get all the way to a PhD with no debt. And in fact, in many of these OECD countries, like Germany, Denmark, France, a number of these countries, they actually give you a stipend to go to college. We did that once here in the United States. That's what my father did. He didn't graduate from college because mom got pregnant with me and he dropped out in his second year. But he got I think it was $200 a month, which was like $2,000 a month in today's money back in the 40s, and to go to college. And what we learned from that experience with the GI Bill after World War II was that, and we figured this all out in the 70s and 80s, and then it just somehow got buried, was that for every dollar we invested in sending young people to college, the returning soldiers, for every $1 we invested, the federal government got back 7 tax dollars that they wouldn't have gotten otherwise during the lifetime of those individuals, because educated people make more money than uneducated people. So we made a 700% return on our investment. And that's why every other country in the world subsidizes education, because it is the best investment you can make in your own country. And yet again, we've got these short-sighted right-wing billionaires and the GOP toadies who dance to their tune, who don't want, basically they don't think government should do anything for anybody because they've got theirs and screw everybody else.
Well, they shouldn't for sure forgive student loan debt. You say student debt harms the American dream. I agree. Yep. But they will tell you these people should not have taken a loan they could not afford to pay back. They need to take more personal responsibility. I pay my loans back, Tom. I didn't have any loans. My daddy paid for mine. But I did if it's another person, and they should have to as well. So this is, what do you say to that? What do you say to that guy? His name is Tony. He's from Brooklyn.
I would tell Tony that he's the victim of Ronald Reagan, that he shouldn't have had to pay that that's a crime against Tony. It's a crime against America to not subsidize education, to not allow people to rise to their best potential and then step off that point after they leave college without debt. To not offer that to people, as the other 33 OECD countries do, is a crime.
How about this? Now you're telling me housing is part of the role of government. You say housing should not be a commodity in your new book. And I suppose you're going to tell me some bygone era where the government gave some kind of money to people who fought in a war or something like that that allowed them to buy a house unless they were black. But the bottom line is housing is not a right. And I had to work hard and no one gave me anything. My dad probably gave me a little bit. But tell Brian from Montana about why housing is part of the American dream.
Yeah.
Not a commodity.
What I'm arguing is that housing should be protected from raw capitalism. And let me explain.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that the government should be buying houses and providing them to people. What I'm saying is that housing should not be something that is bought and sold and traded on Wall Street. This is a relatively recent phenomenon in the United States. It was really in 2008 when the housing market melted down as a result of all these scams. Trump University and all these other people were telling everybody, hey, borrow as much money as you can and buy houses and turn them into rental properties and you can make a fortune. And it crashed. And, Steve Mnuchin evicted 30,000 people all by himself in California, and et cetera, et cetera. And when that happened, one of the big investment houses, and I think it was Goldman Sachs, it might have been Morgan Stanley, wrote a white paper on how housing is in the tank right now. It's a great time to start buying housing and converting it into rental properties. And this could be the new investment opportunity. And multiple big banks and hedge funds jumped on this to the point now where in some communities, as many as half of all the housing in those communities is now owned by New York investors. And what they do is they buy up housing that would otherwise just be on the general market that other people could buy to buy a house and flip them into rentals. And so that's and then they control the rent, and they're doing it like monopolistically. In fact, they're being prosecuted right now by the Federal Trade Commission. And by turning housing into a commodity, what we're doing is we're driving up the price of housing to the point where we're creating homelessness. This is something that has a long, long history. There are a lot of countries, and the United States is not one of them, but I think we should become one of them, where if you are not a citizen of the country, you can't buy housing unless you're going to live in it. In Canada, if a Chinese billionaire wants to buy, 3,000 houses in Canada, they can't do it. They can buy one, and they have to live in it at least 6 months out of the year. Here in the United States, you got Chinese billionaires who literally own 3,000 houses. We have 700,000 homeless people in the United States, and we have 14 million empty houses. Most of them are investment houses. That's crazy. That's just crazy. So what I'm saying is that we should pass a law that says, you can own 2 or 3 or 4 houses. If you want to, one of the things that, average Americans do, buy a house. When they buy their second house, they keep the first one and turn it into a rental property. And you do that 2 or 3 times, and by the time you get retirement age, you get a nice little income. You built a nice little nest. God bless them. Let them do that. But right now, you've got big investment banks that are coming in to housing markets with literally bags full of blank checks, representing tens of millions of dollars in the accounts, and buying up housing like there's no tomorrow. You see these signs on the telephone poles that say, want to sell your house for cash? Call this number. This is what they're doing, and it's destroying our housing market. We need to protect our housing from these, from this form of unregulated raw capitalism.
So much more to talk about in the hidden history of the American dream. We've just scratched the surface here. It is such a good book, as are all the rest. Before I let you go, I wanted to just ask you one more question about how you answer this, because I need your advice on it. I'm going to do a debate. I'm going to try to be like you next week. And one of the issues is about inflation. And I just want to know quickly what you think were the kind of primary causes, or what, if anything, the government, politicians, and legislators at the national level can do about inflation. What causes it, and what can be done about it? Because it gets very political very quickly, but this is monetary policy and fiscal policy. It's not that complicated about what caused it and what can fix it, is it?
No, it's not. And in essence, inflation, there's 2 or 3 different things that can produce inflation, but 95% of the time it's one simple thing, and that is that there's more demand than there is supply. And the demand drives up prices. If there's 10 people who want to buy a house and there's only 3 houses, you're going to see a bidding war, and the price of the house is going to go up. That's called inflation. And Europe saw a massive inflation in the 1400s after the Black Death. Whenever you see, for example, there was a massive inflation in the United States, or a relatively significant inflation after World War I. There was a huge inflation in the United States after World War II. Truman and Eisenhower had to deal with it. Whenever you've got a disruption of world trade, or even manufacturing within your own country, like these wars produced, or like, illnesses, and World War I was particularly bad because we also had the flu pandemic. Whenever you have that happening, the availability of goods decreases, and the availability of services, because people are sick, people are knocked out, people are at war, people just got killed. And as a result of that, there's fewer goods, but there's still just as much demand. And that produces inflation. So when we had the pandemic, we had already shifted most of our manufacturing overseas because of Reagan's neoliberalism. And the result of that was that we didn't have stuff here that people wanted. And so they started bidding up the price of it. And suddenly a roll of toilet paper is $10. That works itself out. It worked itself out after the Black Death. It worked itself out after the War of 1812. It worked itself out after the Civil War. We had a huge inflation after the Civil War. It always works itself out. It takes about 2 years, typically. And that's what's happening right now. It's working itself out. We're going back to a normal economy.
Is there anything that politicians can do about it? Legislators can do about inflation?
Yeah, yes and no. You can you can't. What's difficult is increasing supply when you don't have control over it. In the case with the pandemic, with COVID pandemic, there were a lot of efforts by a lot of governments, to move goods around the world, even during the pandemic, but they weren't always successful, and that's a tough one. You can jawbone people like Jimmy Carter did when the Arab oil embargo. Again, there was a shortage. There was a shortage of oil. Boom, we had an inflation. In fact, Ronald Reagan never got inflation below 4.1% in his entire 8 years, because that inflation echoed for quite a while because the Arabs kept the price high. But the bottom line is that it's really tough to change those dynamics. You have to alter people's behavior. You have to say to people, don't buy as much stuff. And typically, that doesn't work. And so, the thing that causes people to stop buying stuff is the inflation itself.
But you didn't mention
they back off. And that's how it balances out. You
didn't mention corporate greed as being something that's accentuated or extending it. I don't know how much of the cost of food.
But that was on the back end. I mean, the natural inflation happened as a result of the pandemic, and you could argue in some ways because Trump's response to it was so bad. But then once that inflation started, you had all these companies going, "Hey, look at this! Prices are going up 3%. Let's raise our prices 6%. Nobody will notice." And so we had greedflation as well. And there's a number of economists, Dean Baker's probably, Paul Krugman, these Nobel Prize winners. They're saying that somewhere between a third and a half of all the inflation we experienced over the last 4 years was the consequence of corporations exploiting the natural inflation that came along with the loss of goods and services from the pandemic.
But it's very hard for politicians to tell a company or an industry that they have to do something about their prices, that they could affect the markup or something, right? That's not.
It's very difficult. Yeah. Nixon tried to do it with wage and price controls, and it blew up in his face.
Yeah. Thom Hartmann, you are the best, and I so appreciate your time today. And as always, everybody needs to get this book and all of your books. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Pete. It's great seeing you again. Thanks so much for inviting me.
All right, there you go. Thom Hartmann, the legend. Go get that book. Go get all the books in the Hidden History series. So great. Really enjoyed that. Hopefully you did too. I'm glad that nobody bombed Tom's house. Those fighter jets sounded. I was very worried what was happening there just above his home. Okay, well, that's all I've got for you on today's episode of Stand Up. I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout, and I hope that you are doing okay in general or overall. Thank you very much for your support here on the podcast. I cannot do it without you. I am so grateful to have you supporting me and to be able to spend some time with you today and whenever you press play on this podcast. Tell your friends. Let's grow this community, and I hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. John Carroll, one of our favorite people, is, of course, a Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter. He writes all the music for this show. He takes us out. Go buy his music. JohnCarroll.org. Send him your money as well. Bye-bye, Bumblebee.
Stand up, you gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. And even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. Seize the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. listen every